Good afternoon and welcome to the Federal Executive Forum celebrating 19 years of profiling excellence in government IT mission programs. I'm Luke McCormack. During today's show, we will discuss critical issues facing government and industry leaders in rolling out zero trust strategies and technologies. With me on today's show are Sean Connolly, Director of the Zero Trust Initiative at CISA, Roy Luongo, Chief Information Security Officer, U.S. Secret Service, Lou Eichenbaum, Zero Trust Program Manager, Department of Interior, Chris Roberts, Director, Federal Sales Engineering, Quest Software Public Sector, Steve Fail, Federal Security Chief Technology Officer at Microsoft, and Wes Withrow, Senior Client Executive, Cybersecurity at Verizon. Well, we've been at this for a couple of years now, and we've got a great lineup here. Sean, you're going to take us over the top at CISA. We got a couple of great operating components here, and then, of course, our federal partners. Sean, 2 years in the making with the Zero Trust Initiative that came out from OMB. You all have been on a tear. It seems like we've gotten sort of the definitions down, some of the culture down. We're really focusing on some of these pillars. It looks like we've got somewhat of a handle on identity, and I know we're sort of on to these other pillars, et cetera. Give us a perspective across the top of how you feel like we're doing at Mass.
Hey, hello, great to see you again. So yeah, as you're positioning, this all started with the Cyber Executive Order and then OMB's Zero Trust Memo 2209. And for the last 2 years, myself, John Sims, Grant Dasher from CISA, working with OMB, we always say OMB and the ONCD are the team captains on Zero Trust, and of course with colleagues from GSA and others. We've been helping agencies as they start to manifest that Zero Trust vision across their agencies. So the great thing is with Zero Trust, it's a little bit of a choose your own adventure. And so we work with all the different agencies, and they all have a slightly different stories of how they're looking at this. But still, there are some common themes between them. You mentioned the pillars, so let's start at the top. So at the same time that OMB released their memo, we released the Zero Trust maturity model. They had the 5 pillars: identity, device, data, application, network. And when we talk to agencies, some agencies are more doing a comprehensive or like a holistic, if you will, revamp of some of their Zero Trust architectures. If you talk to Steve Hernandez from Department of Education, you can hear how they've stood up a Zero Trust office. They've also been able to roll out new SASE type solution, and they're leaning in on some identity management solutions. And they've been able to do that because they're able to take advantage of the TMF, the Tech Modernization Fund, which I'm a board member of. And then other agencies are going more looking at as almost pillar by pillar. Some are focusing, you mentioned the identity pillar. A lot of agencies have been able to use the memo to not only build out their identity strategy across agencies, but it's interesting also with Zero Trust is some agencies are using to collapse their tech stack. So maybe they had like a handful of identity providers before, and they're using memo to consolidate and get that enterprise level vision across the agency for identity. So again, there's a number of ways you're seeing agencies use the memo and use our maturity model, use the wealth of material out there to help their Zero Trust strategy.
Yeah, it seems like the identity one in particular, a lot of technology already in place. It was a matter of synthesizing that, unlocking that capability. Now they're off to several of these other pillars, at least from my observation. Roy, how about over at Secret Service? I know you all have been on a tear over there trying to get your capabilities in place. Give us a top line as to where you're at.
Yeah, no, I agree.
And welcome to the show, by the way, Roy.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity. Thanks for having me. No, I have to agree with what Sean said. That in the 2 ways we've taken kind of by design almost a pillar by pillar. We that's just the easier way for us to eat that elephant, right? So there's a lot that goes into that. Which technologies we do. There were a lot of people that advertise turnkey solutions, which we know never really are turnkey solutions. We've got to get user acceptance on some of these things, as well as keep everything operating while we pretty much change the entire architecture over time, right? Most of the architecture. You're flattening a lot of things out, removing barriers that were perimeters, those type of things. And we have to keep everything running while we do it. So I think one of the biggest things I've seen over recent time is the acceptance that this really is a marathon, and there really may not be a full end state. There's a maturity level and a maturity model that we have to shoot for, but we're always going to be revamping and updating the zero trust thought processes on what we can do and how flexible we can be, and really designing where you are when you have like a global mission. And most of the people on here, I'm sure, have global missions. You can't just, okay, when you're in the office, this is how we're going to do it. When you're overseas, this is how we're going to do it. We really need a model that hybrids across wherever we have to do mission. And I think Zero Trust does that better than some of the previous models. We just have to get there.
Really important to point out that it is an architecture, right? And an architecture continues to evolve and mature and get built upon. So it's a good catch there, and we appreciate everything that you all are doing over there. Lou, how about at Department of Interior? I don't think people realize how huge Department of Interior is, and
Uh,
the footprint that you all have and all the things that you're doing inside that organization, which we appreciate. How do you lay zero trust down in that type of an environment?
well, it's very difficult, right? We have 80,000 employees spread across the entire United States, and some other countries as well. So
Hmm.
it's difficult. I will say this: the last 2 years, really, what we've been focused on is, you know, building an organization that can deploy a zero trust architecture across the department. I think, one of the key things for us, one of the things we've really learned in the past 2 years is one of the real key things to being successful with zero trust is really educating and creating a culture of zero trust in your organization. It's not just about implementing technologies, right? It's getting everyone involved in understanding what zero trust means and incorporating it into your daily IT activities. So, in the past 2 years, Sean mentioned Department of Education and their approach, and they're a close partner of ours. We work closely with their team to understand each other's programs. We're doing a similar approach where we're taking a holistic approach. We've built a DIY-wide virtual zero trust organization. We have 143 people across the department who are part of this program. We've aligned our organizational structure with the system maturity model. We're building strategies for each one of the pillars to deploy what we believe is a zero trust architecture that aligns with the Department of Interior's mission goals. And there's many things we've been focused on in the last year, but one of the things that we also found that was important is looking at what is our mission, what are our current capabilities, in determining how we can mature those. So like Roy said, it's a marathon. It's not something we're going to do in a year or two. It's not something that we're going to ultimately ever get to a point where we're at a fully optimal state of maturity. It's something we're going to continue to manage and grow over time. But I feel like we've been pretty successful considering the complex environment that we have to manage, the diverse missions that we have to manage. And it's certainly not a one size fits all. You have to build an architecture that supports your environment. So I think we've made great progress. There's a lot more work to do. And yeah, we'll continue to work with our partners to keep this moving.
Yeah, it's interesting. OMB puts the North Star out there. CISA sort of, is really trying to make sure that the community at large is focusing and getting it done. Different agencies going about it differently, including how they assign their zero trust architecture point of contact. Right, that's a little
Right.
checkered, if you will,
Yeah.
across different agencies. But I think the North Star gives them flexibility, all the various agencies, to pursue it in a variety of ways. Let's talk to Chris at Quest. Where does Quest fit into this? What are you all seeing across the interagency as these various departments and agencies start to go on the zero trust journey?
Yeah, sure. Good morning, Luke, everyone. So, as both a maker and consumer of zero trust technologies, we have both a responsibility to ourselves as an organization, as well as to our federal agencies, to deploy a lot of the things that we discuss. So, sort of practice what we preach. So, we have gone on that journey from on-prem AD to Azure AD, now Entra ID. we've improved the way we monitor and audit and start to do more what we call behavioral analytics around what's happening on our network, specifically as it relates to Active Directory or AD.
Mhm.
And then we started thinking about, well, you know what? We need role-based access. So there was, we'll all admit to it, there was a time when if you were a user on a network, chances are you had access to everything. And now we've begun and had a long process of locking down everything from file servers to SharePoint to access to databases, and our SaaS applications. So we use Salesforce, and well, should you be able to access everything in Salesforce? So everything comes back to role-based access. And these are all solutions that we have been providing to the federal government. And I think part of us was, how do we now make sure that we're actually using these technologies so we can actually be our best use case to our customers? And we've grown that over time. The adoption of multi-factor authentication was a pain at first, from SMS, now the authenticator apps, now encrypting and doing things at the endpoints that weren't done before, to the point where you can't plug in USB devices into your corporate laptop. Things like that we think are innocuous, but they're so important, because you think of all the breaches, how malware gets into a system. It's usually an endpoint device. So whether it's a mobile phone, tablet, or your laptop, if you don't protect those devices using zero trust capabilities and technologies, you're typically going to run into problems over time. And lastly, as a vendor, I think for us, the responsibility is on having a secure supply chain. We think about the software solutions, we think of the services, but where does all that code come from? And right now, I think you believe if you're part of the federal government, or you're part of the vendor selling to the federal government, you have to understand, what is your software bill of materials. If you can't produce an SBOM, you can't attest, if you can't convincingly show exactly where every piece of that code comes from, that's a problem, because you can be secure all day long, but if you've got a piece of malware buried deep in a stack, that's going to be a problem for you. So we've been living this journey for a while, and I think now we're able to help a lot of our federal clients understand what it takes to get to a zero trust architecture.
I really do appreciate you flagging the secure by design, if you will, as the director likes to say it, as a concept, and making sure that we're focusing on those SBOMs, et cetera. That's a critical part of the infrastructure. Wes, speaking of infrastructure, you all are mapped across a variety of departments and agencies, and certainly across the private sector as well. Give us a top line as to where Verizon stands as far as zero trust architecture and helping these agencies implement it, perhaps helping yourselves implement it.
It's been a lot of fun, actually, over these last few years in zero trust. I mean, there's been a lot of progress, and progress really.
I think you're the first person that has referenced zero trust architecture and fun in the same sentence, but
well, the conversation,
just noting that.
The conversations across agencies, right, have just been a lot. We haven't seen a lot of pushback, right, in zero trust, right? So
it makes sense, right?
Right. Yeah, it makes sense. Sean mentioned, right, it's kind of a choose your own adventure. So when we're in doing like workshops with agencies, we're not getting that pushback as if we were coming in and doing audits with them, right? So across federal, across state, local, where there's been a big groundswell in the state, local, area, as well as the private sector, what we've seen is just a lot of consensus in terms of just adopting the vision and seeing the value, the maturity level alignment. So we've been using the CISA maturity level. And we've got a lot of positive feedback there. So when we're in working with different agencies, and we're still helping kind of color code where they are in those areas, it's been well aligned. And so what we've seen is really just that alignment on the vision, the strategy, and the overall execution. So on the vision side, there's a very clear understanding of what zero trust is. The stakeholders are getting aligned to it. On the strategy side, right, we're starting to see zero trust architectures coming out from different agencies and cross-functional teams that have been participating in it. And then on the execution side, we're seeing these roadmaps being refined and developed as well too. Seeing the implementation of new solutions, we're seeing proof of concepts happening. And lastly, and this is probably one of the most interesting parts of this, is an interesting observation per se, is the different cross-functional teams that have been interested in participating in this. So, for example, we had a security team I was working with the other day that the CIO was asking them specifically about, I need a brief on where we are on zero trust. And on the federal side, for example, contracting officers, we've actually done some workshops where the contracting officer wanted to participate. So the message is permeating not just into the security parts of the organization, but it's permeating throughout the agencies as well too.
That's a good catch, and yeah, it's much bigger than just the CISO, if you will. And
Mhm.
I'm glad to hear that the contracting office has cited an interest as well.
Yeah.
Steve, how about at Microsoft? You all are essentially are on the preponderance of desktops across the federal agencies. You're very much involved in identity management, et cetera. A lot of the security protections. Give us a top line as to where you all stand in respect to implementing this capability across the interagencies.
Absolutely. Thanks, Luke. So we see ourselves on the front lines of zero trust, both in our internal journey that we have gone on over the past 8 years, and really the realization that it's not just a journey; it is the infinite game. So love that Roy brought that up earlier. This is continuous improvement, and I think that's one of the reasons why agencies have embraced it is really that continuous improvement mindset, going after the legacy challenges, going after those things, retiring legacy. There's a lot of appetite for that just because of the security risk that those systems create. I think one of the biggest things that we've seen is a greater understanding of the scope of the zero trust work that needs to be done. And so at Microsoft, we've had our own realizations of that. As recently, we had a dev test environment that was compromised by a threat actor, and we had a lot of rich learning around that. You can have zero trust, that you've worked on for 8 years and done a great job in your production systems, and they're all hardened. But if you leave a dev test environment and it has an identity connection back into a corporate environment, that corporate environment now can be at risk because you don't have the understanding of the attestation and the provenance of the application that's sitting over in that dev test environment. And so back to the software supply chain that was mentioned as well, the need for SBOM, understanding provenance all up and the attestation of every application that has access in your environment. If it's dev test, if it's an experiment someone's running, if it's a small vendor, if it's a large vendor, it doesn't matter. Realizing that is the scope for zero trust. It's not just your corporate environment. It's not just your prod. It's not just your government customer-facing systems for your constituents. Really, everything is in scope for the threat actors these days. And so zero trust needs to permeate every aspect of the organization. We see a lot of federal organizations embracing it. Census, Secret Service, we see on the DoD side, Navy absolutely leading the way, but every other service wants to leapfrog them. A little bit of competition there on the DoD side. So, just great work that's going on, and folks are realizing this is going to be a continuous improvement project, and lots of learnings along the way.
A little healthy competition is what made this country great, and I really do appreciate you pointing out the wide swath of threat vectors that are out there. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Network. We're talking about zero trust architectures, and we're talking about the implementation of. Roy, I'm going to come to you and talk about a specific program, perhaps a specific slice of the zero trust architecture that you would like to highlight for the listening audience.
Yeah, I think the user identity, I'm really impressed with how my teams developed and implemented their ICANN processes so that we can really get to remote access, conditional accesses, all those things based off, the other pillars, but our user identity programs, I think I'm really impressed with where we're going with that. I won't say it's the key. I don't think any of them are the key. I think some have some bigger priorities based off mission set. But for us, being able to validate our users almost from anywhere at any time is really important to us, especially as we have that short notice global mission. I like to say every time the president wants to go get a hamburger in Iowa, we have teams who have to get out the door and go. So being able to make sure that they can authenticate and use the resources that they need to is really important to us. So I think that's my highlight for where we are. We have a lot moving, but for where we are, I think that's the big move.
I really do appreciate that. And I know that sometimes those decisions are made very quickly and you all have to spin on a swivel there. Chris, how about at Quest Software? Would you like to highlight an example of where you've seen some fantastic activity happening in zero trust architecture?
Sure. I think from our perspective, we've been on that journey for some time. We work with several agencies on improving their zero trust architectures, especially from a deployment standpoint. And a lot of time that focus has been at the perimeter. How do we lock down? How do we protect ourselves from unauthorized access? And what we learned is that, sure, we can build those systems and we can provide those systems. We can have role-based access, even attribute-based access, and we can protect the perimeter. And what we found is that during our migration process with one large DoD agency, we helped them on the journey of getting from on-prem to hybrid and in a lot of cases, pure cloud native. So moving AD and SharePoint workloads into the cloud, optimizing first, then getting them to migrate. And then once we got there, we realized that, well, okay, how are you actually protecting that literal data? And what they discovered was they didn't know where that data was. They didn't understand the data sets. And to me, that's the honeypot at the end of the hacker rainbow. What data can I exfiltrate from an agency? And if an agency doesn't know where their data is, who has access to it, well, the morning after report's pretty painful because you can't tell what they took. It's like you come home, your house is robbed, and like, did we have a flat screen or was it an Xbox? So knowing that is critical. So we help them identify where is your data, who has access to it, build the metadata, so like the data of data repositories, so they can understand exactly where they need to apply RBAC to, whether it's a file, whether it's a container, whether it's a bucket somewhere. All those things need to have zero trust principles applied to it. And I think it was a painful journey because they didn't really want to think about it because they're security heads. If you really talk to someone who's into security, the last thing they want to talk to is a DBA or SharePoint administrator, because that's not their role. They don't want to think about that. They've locked down the fort. Everything's fine. But when we showed them that if someone just got in, for instance, if Microsoft didn't find the XZ hack, for instance, and they just slipped in and got the data, well, what was exfiltrated? So we helped them understand exactly where that data is, how to manage it, and then determine who should have access to that data. And that's where all those great zero trust technologies come in real time, and it makes developers a little painful, but they get through it. But that's the most important thing we've been working on in DoD. And
it's a very good catch. The days of guards, gates, and locks are gone. I always used to say, the bad guys aren't coming into your environment to see how cool your network's configured. They're coming after your data. Sean, how about at CISA? As you look sort of across the spectrum there, it seems to me that we have a lot of civilian agencies that are focusing, as you said, one pillar at a time. Oftentimes it's the identity pillar. Can you give us kind of a top line as to what you're observing? Maybe highlight an example of some goodness out there.
Yeah, sure. So I think one thing that's critical, and you've heard both Chris and Wes talk about and lose an example of this, is the ability to have that zero trust lead office for the enterprise. We talked about this a little bit before, but especially when the executive order came out and then the zero trust memo came out, one thing that was different about this than other memos or other initiatives coming out was it really had the attention of top leadership at the agencies. Some of this you can point back to SolarWinds, and then even what's happening in Colonial Pipeline, and just the risks that are involved, and the attention it got across the government and the public. So there was really an interest top down from like the assistant secretaries asking the organizations, asking inside their agencies, what is zero trust? How are we helping support this? How are we building out that architecture across the government? To be fair to like a lot of the CISOs and CIOs with zero trust, this is really, to me, it's always been some of these first principles of cybersecurity, right? Just segmentation, identity management. But with technology now, we're in a different place than we were 10 years ago, how we can apply it. So I think bottom up, there's always been a need or desire, like this is the way we need to go. But what's just been different again is that top-down vision to support this. So I think the most critical thing, going back to where I started this with, is having that organizational vision across the agency, building that strategy. One thing I love about DoDs, I think it's their strategy or maybe the reference architecture, is the very first thing that says most important is the education and the training that's going on within the workforce itself. We talked to Randy Resnick, the DoD Zero Trust Portfolio Management Director, all the time. And it's really just a game changer how it's been supported from that top level at CIO in DoD. And so I think you're hitting into this a little bit before with the way that zero trust like SME or POC that we work with is bounced around some agencies.
Mhm.
Sometimes it started with the CIO, and then you may see it bounce to the CISO. One
Yeah.
organization we're familiar with, it went to the CTO for a little bit, and now it's back, I think, in the CISO office. So
Yeah.
it can bounce around just because the organization needs to figure out who needs to lead this vision. But that's really the key for this whole thing to work.
Yeah, I think that getting that sort of solidified, and it's starting to on the civilian side, I think is really important. And look, holding those secretaries accountable, I think, is another really important key to the structure of the memo and the direction. So hats off to you and OMB for doing that. That was I think a really big deal. Wes, how about at Verizon? Do you want to give us an example of a specific program you'd like to highlight?
So we kind of got some specific programs we're working on, but in terms of like the broader part of the programs we've been supporting, right, is they've got, a lot of agencies have come to us and said, hey, tell us what we need to do to get started with zero trust. I mean, I'm referencing a specific state local customer right now, but this has been just broad across all the different agencies. I mean, we try to break it down for them at the very beginning and say, hey, there's really kind of three key things, right? You want to get moving. We talked about it, earlier, but the first is, just the stakeholder team, right, with cross-functional members. Having that designated zero trust lead, right? So it's usually the program manager, CISO, it kind of bounces around. And that cross-functional team, that's the biggest one that we kind of try to reiterate with agencies, because we'll see a good successful program have the CIO, the CISO, the security, the network, the IT operations team. We talked about the contracting officer as well too. The second one is just being aligned to a framework. And this was kind of a softball for organizations right now, because we've got the CISA Zero Trust Maturity Model, we've got the DoD reference architecture, we've got the NIST 800-207. But what's been interesting about just on the alignment of frameworks is once an agency kind of sees those pillars and then the capabilities that map to them, right, they start asking questions about, how does knocking out one of these capabilities in these pillars have an impact across all the different pillars? And so that's kind of the litmus test of when we know an agency is ready to start to move forward. And then lastly, I kind of close on this, is that they're working from a roadmap, right? And this is nothing new in terms of, how do you track progress? But in this instance, right, we're saying we're, letting agencies know that if you want to actually be able to show success in this in the early stages, is always have something in your hip pocket that's in a presentable format and be able to actually show it in some kind of, it's a very simple view. Usually one slide you're able to do that in. Make sure it's flexible, right, adaptable, what you're changing to. And then the last part, and this is probably one of the most important parts, right, is we help them understand that you need to align your vision to budgetary cycles as well too, even if it's notionally, right? So you can get all of this stuff on paper, have a great architecture in play, be able to communicate that progress, but make sure you also understand how that aligns up with your budgetary cycles as well.
Good catch there on the budget piece of this, and roadmap really important. I think the maturity model that CISA had produced was really clutch for getting a lot of these agencies super focused. Lou, you talked about sort of biting this elephant one bite at a time. You want to give an example of maybe one of those bites that you want to highlight?
Absolutely. So, early in this process for us, we were looking at, what are some of the big, what are some of the things we can do now to make progress, right? What are some of the big challenges that we believe zero trust can help us with? And one of the basic principles of zero trust, right, is microsegmentation and ensuring that you're putting the appropriate security controls as close as you can to your critical assets, right? So looking at our model, we realized what is the soft underbelly of our network. It was, for us, it's end user devices, right? Our end user devices sit inside our networks today, right next to our high value assets. And that's been, again, the soft underbelly that people have compromised to gain a foothold on one internal device, and they've been able to move laterally and move to other assets. So we initially said, how can we work to implement a solution to resolve that quickly? So early in our process, we came up with a strategy around SASE, and I'll mention Intra ID, which is part of that, so that we could effectively remove these devices from our internal networks. And this, going back to what Wes was talking about concerning budgetary planning, we made some good decisions a couple of years ago. We made some decisions around our portfolio management to plan funding for these things, plan funding for SASE. We invested in SASE. We have been piloting SASE, and we also got a little lucky, I will say, in the sense that there was a critical vulnerability that came out recently that impacted our VPN solution that forced us to expedite our SASE. I think Sean's very familiar with this. And I'm happy to say this is one of our biggest successes to date. You talked about the size and complexity of our organization. We completed a full SASE deployment to over 80,000 employees just last month, and we've replaced our VPN solution. All of our employees now are using a SASE solution to access resources. It's certainly not the end of our SASE journey. For us, it's phase one. It's primarily right now for remote teleworkers. We're now working on building solutions for our 2,400 branch offices. So instead of having to use dedicated circuits to connect back into an internal network, they'll now be able to leverage our SASE solution to access any resource they need from the department. So I think, the success story with this, in my view, is the fact that, hey, we actually developed a strategy. We developed a funding strategy. We developed planning for this, and it enabled us to do this in a short period of time when we had a critical need to do it. So that's one of the many things that I think is important about what we've done at Interior, which is going back to what you were saying earlier, identifying a single entity to manage this program, a single person that can oversee it and manage it. I was in a meeting a couple weeks ago. It was a roundtable, I think 6 or 7 other federal agencies, and I was the only person in the room. The Department of Interior was the only agency in that room that had that single person. They were still kind of juggling it around to say, hey, this is, we need to figure out where this goes under. And I'm not, in this instance, I won't say we were smart about it. We kind of got lucky. We made some decisions early where we said, you know what, we did it a little different than most agencies. We didn't put the function under our CISO because we saw it bigger than just security. Zero Trust to us, it's bigger than security. It touches everything we do. So we said, we're going to put the role directly under the CIO. It grew organically over time, and I think it's been effective for us, and it's enabled.
It really paid off for you all, and a good catch. Right past identity is that microsegmentation. So many times these bad actors get into these environments and go lateral, and they just clean house, and that is an area that really needs a lot of attention. I think the implementation of that is not as hard as it used to be. So we would encourage all of the agencies to really focus their attention on that, because that's an area that I think is really critical and creates a lot of vulnerabilities when it's not shored up there. Steve, how about at Microsoft? Would you like to give a specific example? Like the other partners here, you have all these agencies coming to you saying, help us. What are they asking for?
Well, I think as we're trying to really look at what does success in Zero Trust look like. I mean, we could measure it according to frameworks. We could measure it according to assessment. Microsoft had the privilege of being the first CSP to achieve target level Zero Trust for the DoD based on their assessment. But really, the way that we look at measuring success and what we talk about with agencies, just making it real, is it's the look on the face from the red team lead after they work against the environment that you just implemented Zero Trust on. And I think that's really how you measure success. If they're incredibly frustrated, you've done your job, right?
Right.
And
if they're licking their chops, you got some work to do.
Absolutely. And so, we've done probably 8 or 9 recent red team events, purple team events as well. Microsoft internally, we use red teams a little bit differently. We also use them as a design partner when it comes to our implementation of Zero Trust. We stand up a new system. It's not just, hey, validate that this is good. They actually get into the internals. They make recommendations, those types of things. But we also work with our customer red teams as well. And the US government has amazing red teamers. And it's really gratifying to work with them, to learn from them, and to see the look on their face when they try to go up against an agency's Zero Trust implementation. And so one of our measures, in addition to the look of frustration on the red team's face, is also, can the blue team give the outbrief afterward? And so if the blue team indeed has seen everything the red team has done, and the red team isn't able to cite anything that the blue team didn't see, then we've done a pretty good job at Zero Trust. And to call out, how many white cards did it take? Was it 1? Was it 2? Was it 10? Because obviously we don't just want to stop at, oh, the red team couldn't get in. We want to let them in and then make sure we can still prevent them from moving laterally. We want to let them in, let them work, report on what they're doing, those types of things. And so if that blue team can give the outbrief, and we've had many blue teams throughout the federal government that have worked on Zero Trust actually do that, and it's been a first. It's been really gratifying to see.
Fantastic, and we really do appreciate that. We're going to talk about top priorities. Sean, I'm going to start with you. Number one priority for CISA this year. What must you get done this year?
Yeah, sure. So I'm actually going to say two things. First, from the OMB angle, with going back to the Zero Trust memo, a lot of the taskers in the memo had a 2-year timeline. We're starting to come up on a 2-year release of that memo. So I think from the top-down leadership, you're going to start to see, agencies being asked where are they on their Zero Trust journey from where we started 2 years ago. And then more toward myself and CISA. Lou was talking about this, and full disclosure, the listening audience, I did not pay Lou for this, but you heard Lou talking about SASE solutions. So another one of the hats I wear is I'm the TIC program manager. I've been supporting the Trusted Internet Connection since its inception, 2007. With the release of TIC 3 and some of the abilities of ourselves, both at CISA, with our capabilities and work with different vendors, we now have the ability for agencies to move off their traditional TIC access points. And this is very important for more of the small agencies, the ones that have been needed to, or required to use, the MTIP solution, where they have those finite number of TIC access points that the agencies are required to use for different reasons. With the release of TIC 3 and the push towards Zero Trust, now agencies have the ability to move off these finite TIC access points and move on to SASE type solutions. Just to give you a pain point, one of the agencies, they have a lot of their branch office staff out in Los Angeles, and the cloud provider they were using had a presence in Los Angeles, but their TIC access point was in DC. So every time that the users from LA had to access that direct, I don't want to say direct, but the cloud, they had to go through their TIC in DC and back, and that's 45, 50 milliseconds latency. Doesn't sound like a lot much, but when you have thousands of transactions going across, it kills the whole experience. So as SASE, you're starting to see agencies move off their MTIP solutions. They're doing it for the customer experience. They're doing it for the cost. They're doing it for just the latency decrease. There's a number of inefficiencies that we've been able to address with the SASE support for both TIC and what we're doing with Zero Trust.
Yeah, and that experience is really important, and the technology lends itself now to being able to implement that. So hats off for the focus there. We really do appreciate that. We're going to take a short break. We'll be right back. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Network. We are talking about Zero Trust architecture. We are talking about priorities. Wes, I'm going to start with you, Verizon. Top priority for Verizon in 2024.
So our top priority, just in Zero Trust, of course, is really aligning up with helping agencies understand now, since they have the vision, they've got a strategy, is really helping them kind of understand the execution side. So how are we helping them kind of prioritize and implement, their top next 1 to 3 kind of projects over the next 12 to 18 months? And I'll give you an example, because we talked about TIC just a moment ago, right? And And I'll use a federal civilian agency as an example. They came to us and said, hey, we haven't done anything with the TIC program over the last 7 or 8 years, anything different. Can you help us come in and do a TIC 3.0 assessment and then tie it into zero trust, because that's new for us as well too. So we came in, helped them understand what they were working on, what they had, right, how it mapped out to some of their gaps, and then really helped them understand and kind of map out what their interdependencies were across the different pillars and the capabilities and where their zero trust maturity levels were. So after that, right, you can help them understand and prioritize some of the top 2 to 3 type of projects that gave them kind of the most zero trust coverage, as well as help them hit the TIC 3.0. So we were kind of a two-pronged approach there, where it all kind of came back to circle to where they were looking at a secure access service edge type of solution. So again, that's one kind of an example, right? But then what I'll kind of leave with is something that we've kind of seen interesting as part of the priorities as we're working with agencies, is helping them also understand what's the impact to their current service level agreements. What may what types of modifications might they need to make in the future with their service level agreements? Because there's a lot of push with zero trust to make sure you have an accurate inventory of your assets. And now a lot of agencies are looking at trying to create service level agreements around the accuracy of their configuration management database, since a lot of the different things inside of zero trust hinge on actually having an accurate inventory of those assets.
We really do appreciate it. We're going to try to get in as many of these priorities as possible. Lou, top priority for Interior 2024.
Okay, so Sean mentioned TIC, and I'll feed off that, because again, SASE, implementing SASE as part of our overall TIC 3.0 strategy, right? We really want to build an environment that's, it's a data-centric environment versus our old network-centric environment. So we have strategies in place to move off of our 5 on-prem TICs. SASE's phase 1 of that. So we're moving towards also building better controls around how do we manage our cloud-based solutions, and the strategy is to leverage cloud-based security stacks and basically TIC 3.0 in the cloud. So that's one of our major priorities, is building out that strategy. And I just want to transition real quickly to one other key priority. Asking me what my key priority is for this year is sort of like, what's my favorite zero trust pillar, right? To me, they're all this.
We're dying to hear this.
They're all important to me. So so the other thing, again, I think is critically important, zero trust, is training, changing the culture. So we're in the process of awarding a training contract that will educate hundreds of people across the department on zero trust. And we're very close to awarding that. I think that's key. Zero trust, it's not about implementing the new cool technologies, although that is the fun part of it, but it's a change in mindset. It's changing people's thoughts and on how they manage IT resources. And I think training, getting people involved is very key to that.
Blocking and tackling is very important. We really do appreciate that. Steve, top priority for Microsoft 2024 Zero Trust Architecture.
Top priority for Microsoft is our Secure Future Initiative. And the core concept behind the Secure Future Initiative is that the things that made us successful over the last 2 decades aren't necessarily the same things that are going to make us successful over the next 2 decades. And so it is a pivot for us. Things like SDL that we pioneered, we're transitioning to dynamic SDL, continuous monitoring. We're moving fast and fixing things, retiring legacy systems. In the last month, we've retired more than 1.7 million legacy systems, 730,000 applications.
1.7 million, you said?
1.7 million legacy systems.
Wow.
So the scale and speed at which we're operating is we have to move fast, and things may break in the process, but it's worth it to protect our customers. It's worth it to achieve new levels of security. And I think, we look at things being watermelon green. It's green on the dashboard, but is it really green underneath? Are we digging down far enough? Do we have enough visibility based on our Zero Trust initiative to know when things are watermelon green? And I think that's a lesson learned for agencies as well. As they implement Zero Trust, they're going to see more. They're going to see threat actors they would have never seen before. They're going to see legacy systems they would have never seen before. And so burning down that debt as rapidly as possible is absolutely key. And I think the last thing is absolutely committed to secure by design, secure by default, but we have to go beyond that. We have MFA by default in all of our tenants. We need to enforce MFA on all of our tenants, going beyond default to say it's not an option. It is enforced. And so with all of our zero trust controls as they mature, getting to that enforcement phase beyond just design and default is going to be key.
Yeah, enforcement and compliance very key. Yeah, when you instrument, you light the place up like a Christmas tree, and then all the sins get illuminated. Roy, how about at Secret Service? Top priority for you this year?
Yeah, no, such a great question and great responses so far. And I'm stealing watermelon green because I say a very similar
I
thing, but
like it.
love
Watermelon green.
I love it. For me, it's my priorities this year. And again, it's like picking your favorite child if you really like zero trust, but device management, device granulation, getting to where I can use more conditional access based off of my device's health and so forth. But the visibility of devices is something I really want to prioritize this year because we have so much out there. I don't have 1.6 million legacy systems to deprecate, but we're doing a huge effort there too on a much smaller set of legacy things that now that we have visibility, we're seeing things we should have seen before, but now we're seeing them, and now we're seeing that they got to go. And that leads back into Lou and how do users accept the fact that I'm taking away their favorite toy to give them a new toy, right? And that gets into budgets and everything. But I'm really going after device management and device visibility this year as a huge priority for Secret Service.
Great focus area. Chris, how about at Quest? Top priority for you 2024?
Well, fortunately, I'm here and not one of my product managers. So from my perspective, we've been working with agencies for, wow, the better part of 2 decades on security-related solutions. And what I found is that, yeah, they're on that zero trust journey, and a lot of them made great progress. So shout out to Lou for getting to a single point of contact. That really makes my job a lot easier. I am tired of the warring factions between Windows, Linux, and app dev. It's tiresome. But from a priority standpoint, we are starting to help agencies understand, one, how do you now apply those zero trust principles to the underlying data sets? And I bring that up because, everyone's talking about AI. There's an executive order now for safe, secure, trustworthy development of AI, for instance. And one of the core tenets of that was it requires federal agencies to develop a plan for safe, responsible AI. How do you do that if you can't protect the underlying data you're using to train an AI model? And so everyone's rushing out to use this technology. And if you're going to provide a safe, responsible AI, how do you know the data you're bringing into that system isn't corrupted, isn't biased, for instance? So you now have to think about who had access to that data. Can you now do sort of like a data supply chain before you train your AI? And I can't think of anything better than zero trust to enforce that on top of this AI paradigm that we're now facing. So it all comes back to security. Who are my users? What are the nodes they're using? What are the data they're accessing? And please, what APIs do those applications have? You do those things, maybe we'll have a secure future. Maybe AI won't kill us all, but for right now, that's going to be one of my top priorities in the year to come.
Yeah, and a very important part, the integrity of the data and data flow mapping, et cetera, those types of entities, super important to hardening this ecosystem. All right, we're going to have to wrap it up, and we always like to end with this last question about sort of fast forwarding 2 to 3 years. Never like to go past 3 years. Wes, we're going to start with you at Verizon. 2 to 3 years from now, what's the demand signal going to be from our customers? Where is Verizon going to be in regards to implementing this zero trust architecture?
Well, we hope in 2 to 3 years everyone's on 5G, right? But that's probably not realistic.
5G? I'm thinking 6G. 5G is 1997.
10G. But yeah, the next 2 to 3 years, right? We just see a kind of accelerated period of adoption, and really, like, it's the workforce impact and the user experience where we really kind of see a vision of where security becomes less invasive, where it kind of vanishes to the end user. Right. And we talked about SASE. We talked about the cloud native security stacks that people are moving to where people are no longer tethered into the network, and security kind of follows them around like a cocoon. Right. And it doesn't matter if they're connected over a 4G, 5G, a wired connection. So in terms of zero trust can act like the cocoon that will follow users around, irregardless of what type of connectivity that they have. And so we see the next 2 to 3 years they're playing out that way.
Fantastic, and we look forward to it. Steve, how about at Microsoft? You outlined several things there during the show today. What do we expect? What sort of out of the petri dish that'll be in the user's hands in regards to helping with the zero trust architecture journey?
Well, internally at Microsoft, we are building that plane while we are flying it. So we get to eat our own dog food, or some prefer the caviar reference, but we're still pretty attached to dog food. So we eat our own dog food, and we are currently utilizing AI within Microsoft at scale to defend against nation-state attacks. And I will say it has transformed our incident response to be more proactive, more predictive, to understand really the threats that we're facing in a much more comprehensive way. It's not magic. I'll set expectations. It's math, but math is pretty powerful. So at times it may be easy to confuse with magic. And so I think, zero trust is really, as you mentioned before, that increase in visibility, it lights up your organization like a Christmas tree. You can finally see everything that's going on. The problem is we can't comprehend everything that's going on at that scale. In the scale of systems that Microsoft operates, the scale of systems the US government operates, it is really hard to leverage threat intelligence and harvest threat intelligence from something of that scale. And so AI has been transformative for us, reasoning over tens of billions of rows of unstructured data within seconds, getting answers back to analysts, answering deep questions, helping prioritize. It has been absolutely transformative for the way that we respond. And we are taking those learnings, and we will be delivering them to our clients over the next few years. We believe it's going to be transformative. Still a lot to learn. It's early in the game, but I think it's a preview of things to come.
Steve, we really do appreciate everything that you all are doing there. Chris, Quest Software, 2 to 3 years from now, what can we expect to see?
At some point, we're going to have to get to the point where we're going to have some form of artificial intelligence that's focused on security across the board. So for instance, now it is a point solution deployed at scale. So Microsoft's doing it at scale. Someone needs to do it for my mom and her router in her home and her devices. Think of how many devices are deployed across our nation today and how many of them are insecure. At this point, we need to have that power of AI, our ability to understand zero trust principles and great security practice applied across the board. And there's no way for humans to do all of those things. There's no way I'm going to think about, I'm sure my phone right now is misconfigured somewhere. So how do we now apply this great technology that we have access to a real problem we have? Not making cute pictures of puppies playing, with dragons, but really focused on the thing that's impacting our country in more profound ways. I am tired of waking up and getting an email from one of my vendors, hey, you've got free credit report monitoring for a year. Thanks, but could you stop the actual breach? So this is one of my pet peeves. It's the industry that has to come up with the solution. And I think now we're finally at the point where we have a piece of technology in AI and large language models that can be applied to this, from everything from reading and understanding logs for a Linux administrator, right down to getting your device. There's an agent on it that completely configures it so it is absolutely secure on your home network, on a public network, or your corporate network. And I think when we get to that point, I think a lot of the news we see today goes away.
And we really do appreciate that. Certainly a tectonic shift in that technology that's going to unlock a lot of these capabilities. And I think everyone's looking forward to that. Lou, 2 to 3 years from now, you all are chopping wood and knocking down these pillars, educating your workforce. Where do you expect to be 2 years from now?
Well, first, hopefully we'll be leveraging Chris's Skynet solution that he's discussing there. That sounds great. No, honestly, 2 to 3 years from now, I believe if I do my job correctly, I'll no longer be in this role because it won't be needed at the Department of Interior.
Nice.
Yeah,
That's a bold statement.
It is. I could
see
be
if
wrong.
Sean agrees with that when we get to Sean.
I know. Sean's like, wait, I just became the director of Zero Trust. What are you talking about? No, this is what I mean by that. It's my hope that, over the next 2 to 3 years, could take longer, that, zero trust and zero trust principles just become integrated into our regular IT processes. It becomes part of our risk management framework. It becomes part of our SDLCs. It's built into our IT service delivery models. It's, our staff, again, we built a culture of zero trust. They understand, hey, when I build a system, these are the principles I need to incorporate. That doesn't mean that, the capabilities that we're implementing and supporting, that work doesn't need to continue to go on. But the work I'm doing today, building this huge organization to develop strategies, work together to build a zero trust architecture, maybe that's not entirely gone. But yeah, I believe it's significantly smaller because these things are going to be built into our daily IT, activities, IT practices. We'll see. It is a bold prediction. I could be wrong, but I do believe that that's the direction this should go. And then it frees me up to go work with Chris on his AI Skynet solution.
Fantastic. Roy, and we look forward to that, by the way. Roy, 2 to 3 years from now, if I'm an agent coming out of the academy, you issued me a firearm, a badge, a laptop, mobile device. Am I even hearing zero trust, thinking zero trust, or am I just doing my job and it's magic now and it's all secured?
Yeah, no, I think a big part of what you just said is the absolute truth. It should be blind or transparent to the user. But I think we have to get to this point where, under zero trust, I'll say we've taken a 3-dimensional thing and we're making it 5 dimensions. The data points we have to see and we have to pay attention to are much more. So that's increased. I think Steve kind of hit on it, and I know Chris did. We're looking at much more, and people can't do that. We need an AI solution. I had a conversation with FNN about a month ago, and it was kind of central to my premise is, look, Skynet's a thing. I get it. There's always goods and bads with every tool. We have to use, if AI can have any place I think it can help us in, it's in cybersecurity. Looking at this data, and I'm not worried about the bias of hiring and things like that. I'm looking at data, false positives, false negatives, and that's where I want to be. I want to have AI embedded with my humans to oversee it, but looking at all the facets that we've added because we've implemented zero trust with all the new visibility points that we have to now analyze and integrate into a seamless, what happened here scenario. So that's where I want to be in 3-5 years. I want to have AI. I want to have native or natural language querying ability into my AI, so I don't have to teach people KQLs and SQLs and all these things that some people just aren't familiar with. And natural querying language will help me do that. And AI is going to help me get there as well. So that's where I see myself in.
Really appreciate that, Roy, and appreciate everything the Secret Service is doing to protect this country. Sean, I'm going to cheat a little bit, do a little bit of a twofer with you. Since you're sitting in such a unique position there, I have to ask you about top lesson learned, sort of your observation as you're striped across the interagency, and that you could share with the audience. And then let's get into the, what's it look like 2 to 3 years from now?
Yeah, thanks, Luke. To answer the first question, especially in the federal agencies, we've had IT systems for decades. We have some of the oldest technology around. No one's saying we need to throw a EDR client on the Voyager satellites, or we need to put identity management on the Mars rover. And so where I'm going with this is we need to be able to support this hybrid environment. We're going to need to support legacy technology at the same time, trying to embrace modern technology as much as possible. So we've had a lot of discussions with both inside the federal ecosystem and then across the greater critical infrastructure and some other parts of the IT community about what zero trust means to operational technology and those type of, Internet of Things and ICS type solutions. So I think there's a lot of opportunities there about applying zero trust. A lot of this discussion has been zero trust across the enterprise, but what does it mean in those other types of environments? So I think for, some of the priorities you're going to see from us will be towards the other areas of the enterprise that need supporting of zero trust. Shameless plug from CISA. We just opened up our zero trust office. It's to do a few things. It's to help amplify that messaging that we've all talked about here, both with just the education that's needed. We're looking to release some playbooks to help just show or exemplify some of the agencies that are leaning into zero trust in different ways. Another part is key, and I think some of the speakers talked about this, was the educational aspect. We've had a number of cohorts where agencies have had their federal SMEs come through, and we've had some training. We're looking at how to build that out. We're looking at how to support some training from Cloud Security Alliance, CSA. So we've worked closely with them to help just build scale what we're doing toward the zero trust training themselves. And then lastly, just how we look at the zero trust architecture itself. I think, like we said before, there's some cybersecurity principles that go back to the beginning of what we've done with zero trust, but at the same time, where we are now in technology provides some opportunities to look at enterprise architecture and how we support both the system, how we stop the adversary in new ways. We've all talked about the magic pixie dust that is AI and the opportunities there. But zero trust really comes down to just a simple philosophy, right? What's different from where we were with legacy, castle, and moat. Now with zero trust, it means we need proof. We need justification. We need to understand why something needs to access something. You combine that with interoperability. It's not just like ICAM alone or something coming from the network alone or signals coming from the device. You need interoperability between those pillars. So once we have a certain scale of those signals, that proof, combine that with the interoperability, now we can start building confidence in our systems in ways we couldn't before. And so that's why I look at going forward is building that proof of the interoperability, how the organization can build confidence into their systems.
Tying it all together. So we really do appreciate that and everything that CISA is doing. Well, I'd like to thank today's guests for taking the time out of their busy schedules to join us for the program. I'd like to thank all the sponsors for supporting us on the show. I'd like to thank the good people here at Federal News Network that make the program so successful and enjoyable. And most of all, I'd like to thank the listening audience out there that tune in every month. You've been listening to the Federal Executive Forum, part of the Federal News Network.